from one chief first.
Thank you. Welcome, Senator Murphy. My name is Munjid Dawadi. I work with the Council of American Islamic Relations. We worked together on several issues before. And since you started talking about foreign relations and foreign policy, so I'll ask my questions, keep moving to that, and move forward. Quick comment, and I know you said no comments. I think the issue of Syria, I think we should compare Syria to Libya rather than compare it to Afghanistan or Iraq. I think if the US does not intervene in Syria, no one is asking for boots on the ground. And that way, we don't attract the kind of groups that we're afraid of. Actually, if we do not intervene in Syria and stop this massacre from happening, that will actually attract, and it is actually attracting groups that we don't want them there. So I think it is vital for the Americans to intervene. My question actually is about another friend of the US, a country friend of the US, that is actually asking the US to grant a waiver for its citizens when they come and visit the US. And as a matter of fact, there is a bill that is being drafted in Congress to drop the waiver from those citizens from coming to the US. However, that same country is engaged in systematic discrimination against American citizens visiting that country. And I think you probably know who I'm talking about. So the state of Israel, I mean, they are actually asking the U.S. to drop its waiver from their citizens coming to the U.S. However, we know that there are some U.S. and its citizens who are even banned from going to visit the country, or they are, when they go visit there, just like my daughter, she just went there a few weeks ago, she was singled out among all the other groups just because she's wearing the hijab. She has an American passport, she was born and raised here. Every time they stop at a checkpoint, they pull her out of the bus, they talk to her for hours, and I think we should not grant them this waiver if they're going to continue involved in this kind.
So on the first point, I mean, let me just add one more thing about one of the differences between Libya and Syria. Russia is a big complicating factor here, right? We had a UN Security Council united in our action against Libya. We do not have that here. And the worry is that if we were to militarily intervene, we would essentially be fighting the Russians, arms for arms, in Syria. Because the Russians are right now not backing down. That is a scary prospect for the United States to be fighting a proxy war in a way that we used to back in Vietnam and Afghanistan in Syria. If the Russians and the United States can't get on the same page, it's going to be very hard to convince the United States Congress to essentially go up against that nation in Syria today, because the Russians are not backing down from arming Assad. For instance, the Syrians have very complex and sophisticated air defense systems provided to them by the Russians. The U.S. flying planes over Syria is fundamentally different than the U.S. flying planes over Libya. We are at much greater risk. If we were to do a no-fly zone, we could have our pilots shot down because the Russians are essentially supplying air defense systems. It is more complicated and more dangerous, and that's why we're very hopeful that this conference with the Russians that looks to be taking place in a few weeks might lead us to some resolution. With regard to Israel, I just think that all of our effort needs to be on a peace process. I know it seems farther away today than ever before, but Secretary Kerry is serious about trying to restart these talks, about trying to bring the two sides to the table. He's been, I think, to the region 3 or 4 times since he's become Secretary of State. I think that's where the United States should get involved here. And sometimes that's going to involve delivering tough messages to the Israelis. Traditionally, the presidents who have been able to get these deals are the ones who can tell the Israelis when they're wrong, and also tell the Palestinians when they're wrong as well. But I think on this issue, our focus really should be on trying to bring the sides together rather than continuing to have to pick sides between one or the other.
Good afternoon. Thank you. My question is that although we should be very active in regard to the problem in Syria, I'm surprised and wonder why we don't have anything from the situation of Bahrain and other situations similar to that, because whenever there is more or less some kind of benefit from struggles or crisis, we are there and we are serious and we are talking about it. But the situation in Bahrain looks like people have no right of saying anything or doing it. What do we do in Bahrain?
Well, we'll have to. I will not tell you that I'm, deeply familiar with what's been going on there. I did follow it maybe a year or so ago, but in the last 6 months I have not. So I'd be happy to have a conversation with you afterwards about the latest developments there. So I'm not intimately familiar with it. I wish I was, but unfortunately most of our attention recently has been on Syria, you're right. So I'll be happy to have a conversation.
It's a flagrant oppression and oppressed. It's very simple like that.
Yeah, no, I certainly know the state of oppression and of the lack of political speech in the country. I think that there's a limit to what the United States can do. Obviously, we can't necessarily take on every regime that is repressing its citizens. I frankly think it's been a mistake when we have used that often as a means of interfering in others' affairs, but I'd be happy to get an update from you on what's happening there.
Thank you for coming here today. First of all, I would return back to the internal issues for the Islamophobia for the event that happened in Boston. And a couple of weeks before that, it was more severe issue that happened here in Connecticut in Newtown. A young guy has been described by the media as a young guy, and the word of terrorist or terrorism never described it in his bad event. And also, when it comes to any person related to Islam or the Muslim community, then he defined as a terrorist right away. And I see the red line, there is a word of a red line right now, that describes a bad action or a killing or mass killing between a tourist and non-tourist is being Muslim or non-Muslim.
I hear what you're saying. I mean, we were calling this, listen, I think a terrorist act is one that has political calculations behind it, right? And it may be, and we're still learning about these two brothers' motivations, it may be that they had political motivations here. We don't know right now, but you are right. And that question was asked immediately. You should go, there's a wonderful videotape of a senator from Missouri, Claire McCaskill, asking this very question at a hearing about 2 days after Boston. And she said, what's the difference between somebody walking in to a school with a gun and someone dropping a backpack with a bomb on the streets? The result is the same. People die. And without knowing what the motivation was, we called one terrorism and we called the other a mass shooting. I think you're right to be very suspicious here. Now, it may be that we're learning that there's a political motivation here, but if there's not, there is no difference between those two episodes in terms of the impact on the community.
So as I said, I'm going to prioritize women and children or youth. So, Sister Yusra.
I just wanted to thank you for taking the initiative to go to Pakistan, and the drones are very near and dear to my heart, and thank you for your position on those. I just wanted to ask the other members of Congress and the senators who went, do they have the same feelings as you do, and how can we facilitate to help change the policy as soon as possible?
I won't speak for the other members' positions because I'm not exactly sure how their positions might have been changed by the trip. So the other members were three other senators: Joe Donnelly of Indiana, Heidi Heitkamp of North Dakota, and Tammy Baldwin of Wisconsin. I think I can probably say, publicly that I was probably the most concerned on the trip of those who we went with, and. My concern is in part because the campaign in Pakistan is being conducted by the CIA, which means members of Congress have limited information about the drones that are being dropped, whereas the drones that are being used in Afghanistan are being dropped by the U.S. military, and so we have more information about those. But because everything in Pakistan is covert, is secret, there's very little ability for the United States government to do oversight when we can't find out information about many of these. And so one of my concerns here is that I'm very, very worried about these secret wars that happen without the ability of Congress to ask questions. And so I'm taking a hard look now that I'm back about, to the extent that we're ever going to drop a drone out of the sky, who should do that? And I'm skeptical that the CIA should continue to be able to do it without oversight. There is a growing discomfort in the Senate. I think I can safely say that about the drone campaign. I think you're going to hear a lot more talk about this. Remember, the president is able to do this under authority that was given him right after September 11th, something called the AUMF, a bill that said that he could fight Al-Qaeda and its affiliates anywhere around the globe. And the president has basically interpreted that to mean that we can carry out special operations anywhere and everywhere around the world. I think it's time to update that law. I think it's time to come back and set some much stricter parameters on where military action is allowed to take place and when Congress has to step in and oversee it, in part because I think that this is an example in Pakistan where it has likely done us more harm than good, and Congress has sat silent for most of this time, and we shouldn't.
Chris, there's a quick little comment and a question. I think it's worthwhile to have a brief conversation on the role of the diaspora community from the Muslim majority countries, because we may have an opportunity to empower the civil society in Muslim majority countries and then work with the US government in some ways, but to be able to improve the understanding and relationship of the average people in Muslim majority country with the United States, and use the US resources instead of military to build up schools, educations, and healthcare, so that people look at us not as people who are sending drones, but the ones who are actually helping education and building up infrastructure. I think that's the long-term strategy that we will need to move forward.
No, I couldn't agree more with some of your members' help when we were in Pakistan. We were unfortunately only there for about a day and a half, but the evening that we were there, we had a wonderful dinner in which we invited some friends of yours to join us to try to have that conversation, try to make that link between the civilian and economic leadership and our delegation. Part of our problem there is, as you know, is that because we run a lot of this aid through the government, much of it does not have a U.S. face on it, so people don't see the United States doing these big development projects. And as you also know, a lot of this money is taken. There's a lot of, obviously, an enormous amount of corruption when this money is given to the government, and some of it never finds its way down to the people. And as we spoke on a conference call that we had before my trip, it's a challenge because we do need to run some of this money, a good deal of this money, through the government, because part of our goal here is to support a secular government that can fight back these extremist elements. But it's much more efficient for the United States to get the money directly to the people. And so we've got to find the right balance of how much money do we give to the government so that we are supporting them in their work, so that they don't get overrun by more dangerous elements, and then how much can we give directly through nonprofits and through friends of yours so that it immediately gets to the people. It's a difficult question, and I don't know the answer, but I think you're right to say that we've got to continue to have that discussion.
Senator, it's a pleasure to have you. Thank you very much for being here.
And this is the last question I'll be able to take, because I have to be out the door.
I'm originally from Libya, and I want to thank the U.S. for supporting Libya for getting where we are now. However, we still have some challenging issues. Recently, there were some taking over of the foreign ministry, the power ministry, etc., of people who are extremists trying to impose their will on the rest of the country. That's not why we had the revolution. And I'm just wondering, being in a foreign relation, there's any communication with the Libyan government that you can share with us as far as how can we fight that and try to remove those elements from imposing their will on the people? Thank you.
Well, there's not much of a Libyan government today. It's difficult right now to deal with a Libyan government in transition and in formation. And so, we are just confirming a new ambassador. We've had a little bit of a problem there because obviously we have not had an ambassador since he was killed. We are hopefully a few weeks away from confirming a new ambassador. That'll give us the ability to try to influence the transition there. But we are still going to remain very involved. We're going to still be very economically committed to the Libyan people. And you're right, all of our intervention is for naught if we allow that country to be controlled by very dangerous and radical elements.